the 30 and not. Good morning.
Good morning. Is my head?
How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing? You look gorgeous. I love
Thank
your
you.
bold red lip and your hair is so pretty.
I was feeling very red today.
I like
I was
it.
feeling it.
It's great.
So, you ready?
Yeah, today we're talking about my awakening story. This
Yes,
is
we are.
exciting. I've been thinking a lot about it, and honestly, a lot like you, I feel like my awakening story is just like a journey of my whole life, you know? But I've tried to kind of think of the key points. But as I've thought about my awakening, Iggy, I really feel like the cool parts to talk about are the UFOs and the galactic beings and all of the really crazy, the portals and the spaceships. And I've really had some really cool experiences. But what really matters is like literally none of that. I think so much of that has been given to me to draw people in. You know, those stories, they're true, and they really, there is so much outside of what we are aware of all the time, and people are fascinated by that, you know. But when it comes right down to it, that is just the flashy signpost that's pointing you still just to do the inner work. So I feel like I'm going to go through my story, but really the main thing I want to talk about is what I've learned from it.
I think that is amazing. I think that people don't realize that even if it's like mundane or boring, or if it's exciting and like exuberant and you're just like, what, that freaking happened to you? I think there's always a message in it, and your story will come out the way it's meant to come out.
Right. Exactly. So I'll start at the beginning. I was born in Fairbanks, Alaska in 1983, and my childhood was a lot of change, a lot of chaos, a lot of trauma up until the age of 8. My mother and dad had a ton of chaos and negativity, and there was all kinds of awful circumstances in my life up to the age of 8. So many scary situations where this little girl me was absolutely terrified, didn't know if I was going to be okay or not. So many times where my nervous system was just rattled for literally like days at a time. And so that became my regular way of being. And I didn't even realize that until the last couple of years. But through that all, I never realized how guided I was through that. But I remember a lot of times just having, you know, a real relationship with Jesus. First of all, I was in the Mormon church, and I took that so seriously. I clung to the church and to Jesus. And so anytime things were scary or traumatic in my childhood, or even when I just wanted to escape, I developed this place in my mind, and I don't know now looking back if it was actually another realm, another dimension that I was visiting. I don't know. But I could drown out all of the sounds around me and go to this place that was full of clouds. It was just a place full of clouds, and you could ride the clouds, and Jesus was with me always in this place of clouds. And I just loved that place. And so I would go there anytime I could, because my life on earth was really scary. And so I don't know if that was just a coping mechanism or if it was an actual place. I don't know. But as I was little, I would zoom out from myself. I remember doing this at 5 and 6 years old. I would lay in bed and I would zoom out from myself. And then it would crush me. I would feel so small and I would start crying. But I never talked to anybody about my experiences or my feelings. In my childhood, it was very much like you're kind of on your own in a lot of ways. And so I learned to comfort myself. And then basically I would say throughout my childhood, I just had a really strong guidance system. And the Mormon church told me that that was the Holy Ghost. And I don't care what it was called. I'm so grateful that I was able to develop a relationship with spirit, because that's what I look back. It's all the same. And it is spirit, Holy Ghost, whatever you want to call it. There was one time I lived in Somerville, South Carolina. I was 8 years old, or 7 maybe. And I was on the bus with my friend Toy Chica, and we were sitting on the bus, and I got a knowing in my heart center, in my stomach, and thoughts, just literal voices saying, like, it's going to be really bad, but you're going to be okay. And I knew that pulling up on that bus, that there was going to be a really scary scenario unfolding for me at 7 or 8 years old. And sure enough, walking from the bus stop to my house, the whole time I just had this trepidation, this dread, but also this feeling, because I was being told you'll be okay. And that ended up being one of the most traumatic, scary experiences of my entire childhood. But I was warned and guided right into it. There was always this awareness. And I found myself often viewing myself from a bird's eye view as a child. And I think that was another one of my kind of escape mechanisms, is that I would just watch myself from a bird's eye view. I went to BYU on a full tuition scholarship and got everything paid for with scholarships. I was told, if you want to go to college, you're going to have to figure out how to pay for it. And that was something that was really scary and stressful for me. But I got there and immediately started into the Relief Society presidency, which is in the Mormon church, the women's organization. And by the time I left that church at age 26, I had been in 6 Relief Society presidencies, which is so crazy. From the age I was 17 in college to 26, we moved so much. And then every single time I would get put in the leadership, and I was having spiritual experiences. I really believed in the Mormon church. I wasn't faking it. I was teaching. I was passionate about what I was teaching. I really, truly believed it. And I didn't realize that I was clinging to a set of beliefs that were my home, my only stability growing up. At age 19, barely 19, I got married. And, looking back, there were a lot of reasons other than being madly in love that I got married at age 19, but mostly it was for safety and for refuge. My ex-husband had this very successful, stable Mormon family, and pretty much all of my siblings and I we married into these very stable Mormon families because we needed stability. And so a lot of it was that. But I got pregnant right away, and my son had a birth defect. He was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. And that was a whole new set of challenges. So I went from having so much trauma and stress, but nobody would ever know it. I kept my shit together so well. I was always a perfectionist. I was always, the straight A student. I tried to do my best, and really, I was just trying to earn worthiness that whole time. I was just trying to be okay in the world, But by the time I was 21, I had a little 1.5, 2-year-old boy. And my whole left side of my body went numb completely. And I started having these shifts in my vision, just terrible vertigo, but also these shifts that would make me feel like I was falling. And then when I would try and catch myself, I would end up falling. I fell down the stairs over the next few years so many times. It was horrible when I had my second child. So when I got diagnosed, they told me it was absolutely going to put me in a wheelchair in 10 years or less. Or fewer. They said that I had lesions on my brain, but I also had multiple lesions on my spine, and the spinal ones will take away your mobility. And so to prepare for that, they told me not to have any more babies. It would be way too hard on me. But all I ever wanted in my life was to be a mother to a lot of children. And it was a huge part of my value in the Mormon church. In fact, after I had 4, I still felt like I wasn't good enough, that God would want me to have more, that it's kind of an underachievement to only have 4 kids, which is
Oh
so
my
ridiculous. But that was
goodness.
my Mormon mindset, you know?
Yeah.
So I got diagnosed with MS, and that set me on a path to fight for my freaking life. I wanted more children. I did not want to die young. I did not want to be in a wheelchair. You know, I weighed 70 pounds more than I do now at the time. And I was not healthy. I was not eating well. I was not happy in my marriage. I was just sacrificing myself like the ultimate giving tree to everybody. I had no ability to say no. And so I really had to start looking hard at my lifestyle, my stress levels, and that kind of set me on a path toward very subtle self-care. I didn't really learn how to take care of myself until the last year or two. But it really set me on a path toward figuring out what healthy eating is, and how my body responds to food, and how stress affects my life. And so that was a really big turning point. But because I was diagnosed with MS, I decided to have one more baby. And then I thought I was done having children. And I loved to go to the Mormon temple. It was my sacred space. It is this beautiful, quiet, serene place that you have to be worthy to go into, which is so ridiculous. But I used to love to go there because I used to be worthy. And it was my place of refuge. And so silly. But twice in the temple, I saw my children. So I thought I was done having children after Thomas. And I was so attached to my baby Thomas because I thought this was the last baby I would ever be able to have. Yes. And then I was sitting in the Mormon temple and I saw Anna swinging on a swing. I knew that I was going to have a daughter. I knew that, you know, my 2 boys had red hair. She had brown hair. She had blue eyes. I wrote it in my journal. I knew exactly what she looked like. I didn't need an ultrasound. She was there. And then, so I had her. Within a month, I conceived. And then I thought for sure I was done after I got my girl, and I had 3. And then sure enough, I had another vision in the temple sitting there. Saw another brown-haired boy that was supposed to come. And within a month, I was pregnant again. It was so wild and so crazy. But when I was pregnant with Anna, I was asleep in Alpine, Utah. We were living in my husband's aunt's house at the time. And I kept hearing this sound. And I always make the sound when I tell the story because the sound was so distinct. It was like kind of like a didgeridoo. That's really kind of what it sounded like. Every time I hear a didgeridoo, I'm like, that sounds like a UFO.
It's so hard to play.
Oh God, I know. I can't even imagine. I didn't even try when I was at your house. It looked intimidating. But I was lying in bed. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning. My husband had earplugs in and he was sleeping. This was before smartphones. This was in 2007. And so I was 23 years old, I believe. And I was pregnant with my daughter, Anna. And this sound was really faint at first, this sound. And then it didn't really wake me at first. It was just, but it was so gradual and it just kept getting louder and louder. And eventually it was so loud that it was just like, what the hell is that? You know, and I had to get up and see. So it got to the point where it was just overpowering. I step out of bed and the window's right next to our bed and I peek through the blinds and Iggy, I shit you not, there was a giant ass UFO right in front of my face, like right there, metallic.
I believe it.
And I didn't even believe in, I keep hitting my microphone. I didn't even believe in UFOs at the time. That shit freaked me out. I didn't tell anybody other than my close family. I couldn't sleep for months, you know. Anyway, it was hovering there. It was probably, I don't know, 50 feet long or something. I don't know. It was like taking up the whole backyard. And it was hovering there and it had lights on it, colored lights on it. And then I start rubbing my eyes and I'm like, I'm screaming at my husband, honey, honey, I'm like shaking myself like, oh my gosh, you know. I said, wake up, get up, there's a UFO, and he's, trying to wake up with earplugs in. Of course, we don't have a camera right next to the bed or anything.
Right.
And as I'm trying to wake him up, it starts lifting up. And there was an Asian pear tree in the back left corner of that yard. I can picture this moment like
you're there right now.
Yes, it was so crazy. It brushed the top of that Asian pear tree as it went by. I'll never forget watching those two things just interact in that way. Like it's real, like it's there. And by the time Jake got out of bed and was at that window, I could still see it. It looked like a big star, but he couldn't make it out in the sky. And oh my God, I mean, I searched and searched, like UFO sightings, Utah, Alpine, Utah, the day, like it was so, it freaked me out. Yeah, it really did. I was like, I had no idea what to make of it. And so then no more UFO sightings. That I really didn't even tell anybody about that. I wrote it in my journal, told my family, and throughout my entire first marriage, my entire childhood, I just really was quietly, silently suffering with severe depression. It was something that my mother struggled with. And when I was a child, I remember her lying on the floor and just crying and me feeling just helpless for that and not knowing what to do and rubbing her feet and tickling her back. So for me, putting my children through that was never an option. I have always kept my shit very locked up. It's always been like I'm suffering silently, but as I'm going through the motions of being this very high functioning adult, secretly I am fantasizing about killing myself all the time, even though it's like I would never want to leave my children or leave my family. Anytime anything would go slightly wrong, I would fantasize about suicide. I didn't even know what suicidal ideation was. I didn't even know what depression was until I was way too old. Like, I'm sure it was brushed over in health class, but I had no idea that I had depression or anxiety. And, in ninth grade, I was sleeping with a big knife under my pillow, just trying to get up the courage to use it when everyone was sleeping. I tried to drown myself twice my freshman year in high school. And I still didn't know that I had depression. I had never spoken to anybody about it. My dad was very much against therapy. And so the very first time I even went into a therapist's office, I called my best friend to say goodbye. I was done. I couldn't live anymore. I had just barely found out that I was pregnant with my oldest child. And and that was all I ever wanted. But I felt like I was going to be a terrible mother and that this child was going to be better off if he didn't make it through me, because I had no mom growing. My mom left when I was 8 years old, and I felt so inadequate, and I was beyond the depths of depression. And my best friend Christopher literally saved my life that day. He's like, basically told me to shut the fuck up and that he was not going to get off the phone with me until I was inside of a therapist's office. And I had never been inside of a therapist's office. And he didn't hang up the phone with me. And I get emotional thinking about it.
Thanks, Christopher.
Because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. Depression is so real. It is so real. And I'm so grateful now that I can tell my story, because now I get to help people overcome depression, which is and it is running rampant. And one of the most exciting things about the work I'm doing is helping teenagers, because they are really suffering right now. Anyway, suicidal ideation and depression were a huge part of my life. Nobody ever knew it. Not even my own husband was aware of what I was struggling with. I was secretly attracted to women and had not even come to terms with any part of that. I was sexually extremely traumatized and totally fucked up. I mean, I had 4 children, and this is very personal, but it's a huge and important part of my story that 4 children and left a marriage, and I still had never in my life experienced an orgasm. I had never in my life touched my own body.
And
That
that's
is
so
some
common.
real crazy sexual suppression. And within religion, it is extremely common and not talked about that women don't have any pleasure. Their sex is simply to please their husband and to bring
Make
about
children.
children, multiply and replenish the earth. And so it
Not for
wasn't
me.
even something that was on my radar for most of the time. I wasn't
Right.
even feeling like, woe is me. It's just that I was so shut down and so suppressed in that way that you can't blame my husband. You can't blame anything other than just where I came from, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
But now I feel like teaching sexual health is so important in everything that I'm teaching the people that I'm working with, you know?
Absolutely.
So I could go through my whole freaking life. There has been so much. I met and married AJ. When I met AJ, I still had not even thought the thought, I wonder if I'm gay. I wonder if even bisexual. It had never, I was so brainwashed and closed off that I was having these feelings in my body, and then I would have shame about feeling these feelings, but I would never make a connection like, oh, maybe I am just, my sexuality is this and it's okay. No, that felt like an evil part of me that I must extinguish. And that was brutal and extremely depressing, even just in itself. So AJ has put up with, to say the least, so much as a
AJ was
result.
a saint.
He is my hero, the best partner I could ever hope for. And I have put him through literal hell, as I have, because when I met him, I didn't realize, but I had no idea who I was. In any way, I had no idea who I was. The only thing I had intact was motherhood. And motherhood has always been the most important part of my entire life. And it is something that I have worked so hard from day one. I've read every book. Even when I was inside of Mormonism, before this awakening stuff, I was determined, because I had such an insecurity about motherhood, because I felt like I was an underdog in entering the motherhood arena, based on my own traumatic experiences. So I had that. But if someone said, tell me about yourself. My name is Tobi. I'm a Mormon. I have 4 kids.
I
And
think
that
that's
was
so
my
common.
identity. I lost my identity.
Well, you never had one.
I never even had one. You're right.
Yeah.
And when I met AJ on December 10th, 2011, everything changed, but it was, he has loved me so purely and so unconditionally, and he has given me the safe space in order to heal and to find myself. I didn't know I didn't have myself found. He didn't know that I didn't know who I was. And this has been a journey that we've been on together. And we were separated for 2 years. I had to go through a whole fucked up journey of figuring out who I was and making some really shitty mistakes and, some really wonderful experiences. And just, he had to figure out how to be less codependent. I had to be less codependent, and we had to really strengthen ourselves and heal ourselves and come back together. And so after we did come back together, I had developed a meditation practice. I had a vegan skincare company. It's called Belpo, Belpeau. Just give that a little shout out for my sister, because my sister owns the company now. Belpo.com. And I was really just adopting a meditation practice to become a better mother and to become a more productive business owner, just to get more out of my time, because, I was just go. And AJ and I were on a date on June 7th of 2020. So right in the middle of COVID. And having developed this meditation practice, I really had no idea that I was opening up my energies. I didn't know what the fuck a chakra was. Never heard of that. Even an energy center. Like, I was so far removed from anything. I looked like a different person. I had long hair as long as yours, you know, and my life was completely different. And we go on this date, just, you know, eating burgers under a tree because at the time all of the restaurants were closed down because of COVID. And we're sitting there and AJ notices first, like everything, he's like, did you just notice that everything just went really calm? We were at a park right by our house and sitting under a tree, and I didn't notice it until he said it, but there was this really interesting stillness that was happening. And so I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. And then we just kind of breathed and we're just enjoying this just stillness. And then I felt this pull, and I can only describe it as like an energetic pull. I was being pulled, and I got pulled into a trance, and a lot of it is kind of blurry, but I remember sitting when that happened, and then I remember standing, and every tree around, as far as the eye could see, there were mountains in the distance and little tiny trees, and they had huge auras. It was the craziest thing. I had never connected with trees. I had never studied trees. Looking back, trees were actually really important to me. I was proposed to under a tree. I had a favorite tree growing up at my grandma's house that meant a lot, that brought me a lot of comfort, but I had never really thought of myself associated with trees in any way. The Giving Tree was on my dresser at the time. It was my favorite book. But I had no idea that trees were able to communicate with each other, communicate with us, experience like energy exchanges. And looking back at it, I mean, it still just like blows my mind. And I still cannot put into words what happened that day. But for like 90 minutes, AJ, you know, he wrote part of my book because his perspective on this is so different from mine. He says that my face completely changed. I looked like I was a different person, and that my voice completely changed. I sounded like a completely different person. And for the next year, off and on, I had a really raspy voice. It totally changed my voice. For a full year, my voice was not normal. It was so interesting. But from my perspective, I was just taken into full-on visions where I was aware of my human body and I was aware of AJ. And so as I'm seeing these visions, I'm illustrating it and narrating it for AJ, like, oh my God, I'm crying, snot, sweat, tears, just taken away. So there were several things, but one thing that they showed me was my whole childhood. They whisked me past through my entire childhood and showed me trees and trees and trees, me walking past trees and the trees being aware of my presence, and them just letting me know that they have been aware, that they were sort of raising me up this whole time. And they were speaking in entire waves of concepts. Like, it's just this knowing that I had never experienced before.
Yeah.
Oh my God. There were some actual words though. The first words they said were slow down and be quiet. I heard an actual echoey voice say that. And that was those words have changed my entire life. They showed me burial traditions. I had never in my life thought about the way we bury dead bodies in this country. Never thought of that. They showed me cemeteries, and their message was this hurts our earth and this makes us sad. We're weeping over your burial traditions. And then they showed me groves of trees and saying, there is a better way. There's a better way to bury the bodies, become one with the earth once again. And they told me I was going to write a book. They told me that I could go between the worlds. I had never heard of shamanism. Like, truly, I'm sure it was in the history books in high school or something, but this stuff was so far outside of my knowledge that honestly, after it freaked me out so much that I shut a lot of it down because I was just so overwhelmed with what in the hell. And I had tried psilocybin mushrooms maybe a month before this for the very first time. You know, I think a lot of people think that these things only happen when you are using psychedelics or using any kind of plant medicine or
Yeah.
altering your consciousness in some way. And that is one way to experience the spirit realm and to get healing. And it's a beautiful thing. But these things can happen outside of plant medicine too.
Absolutely.
And what it requires is meditation and opening up our energies. But they showed me also, I had never ever considered reincarnation as a concept. You know, by the time this happened, I would have considered myself a very content agnostic, just like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I don't need to know, and I'm living my life and doing the best that I can, and I'm teaching my children that they can't possibly know, and so we just do our best, and that is all.
Yeah.
But then they showed me this girl. She was much more fair skinned than me, long flowing light brown hair. She was wearing like a cream colored, like hippie, like almost like she was in the 60s or 70s. And I
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen this girl in any vision since, so I don't know. But their message to me was, it wasn't even a message. I had a knowing that this girl was me. And she was running joyfully. And it was very clear that she was just in her purpose, you know?
Yeah.
And then, oh my Lord, this, you know how on like maybe a horror movie or something, there's like a sucking, like everything goes to blackness, like
Yeah.
like a sucking, you know?
Yeah.
Holy cow. That's what happened. This young, she looked like she was maybe like 16 or 17, just in her glorious purpose, whatever, her happiness, and then sucked away. And the trees, then they communicate in these wild waves of emotion. And so then
Yeah.
I'm weeping. They're just weeping, weeping, weeping. And so then I'm weeping. They're putting these energies into me. And I know that they were so sad that this girl was taken unexpectedly. And then they
Oh,
said, we
okay.
rushed you back. We rushed you back, they said. And it was kind of a sloppy existence, this rushing back into this life again to try and do whatever I'm meant to do this
Yeah.
time. And there was just this knowing about all of it, that was me, and that I died, and that now I'm coming back. It was just so crazy because it's not specific words, but you know so profoundly, more profoundly than if they had said words, you know?
Right.
So after that, they told me that I needed to go and connect with my mother. They told me that my mother was my spiritual lineage, and my mom and I have had a relationship my whole life, but it's been a struggle for sure. I've never had major anger, but I've always had this desire to fix and to
Yeah.
help and to I've always just wanted my mom. I've wanted my mom. And so I had to draw some boundaries when I started having children. I let her sleep on my little twin bed at BYU. I was sneaking her into my little dorm room to sleep on my bed with her. She was homeless at the time and in and out of shelters and in and out of jail. And so there was a lot going on throughout those years. And I really wasn't, you know, in a lot of contact with her. And so out of the blue, I asked her if I could just come and see her. And a woman that I was dating at the time and I went all the way to Lubbock, Texas, drove there and spent that time with her. And that entire drive there and back, which was like a 2 or 3 day drive each way,
Mm-hmm.
these spiritual waves of insane, like I was having visions, but I was also having these waves of knowing that weren't visual. They were extremely emotional. And my girlfriend at the time was so understanding. In fact, when I came to her and said, did you know that trees can communicate? And I had this experience. She actually had a TED talk that she sent to me right away and was like, oh yes, trees are amazing and blah, blah, blah. She's very science minded. And she
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of knowledge to teach me about trees. And so she was kind of placed in my life at this time and was a huge support to me through all of this. So she's driving and I'm having these insane waves of empathy for each one of my sisters, of my brother, of my mom, of my dad, of my grandparents. Just, they are, these experiences are just coming through me. And it was an overwhelming time. It really
Yeah.
was an overwhelming time. I have 7 children. I was still trying to run a business at the time, and I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. And then after the ceremony of the trees and that trip to see my mom, every single time I would meditate, I was having insane visuals. I saw Shiva. I didn't even know Shiva was Shiva until I saw that same being in a crystal shop and was like,
Yeah.
I've seen that thing, whatever that is with all the arms and beautiful. I saw
That's so
so many,
crazy
like,
because I grew up with Shiva. Like that was a big part of
yeah,
my
so
knowing as a child. I just love it.
and you know, you had so much knowledge that you have been such a huge part in helping me, because I was so, you know, completely against any kind of tarot cards or crystals or energy work, or even Reiki would have been something I would have kind of distanced myself from, you
Yeah.
know. And so it was all very overwhelming. And even in my meditations, it was so intense that I was starting to shut it all down, because I had a very logical brain and I had to know what everything meant. What does it mean? What does it mean? And it was so frustrating because I didn't, there were no answers. There's no way to make full sense of all of this. Maybe a month or two later, we were going to bed. AJ and I were going to bed. And before bed, I was straddling AJ. We were fully clothed. It wasn't like a sexual thing, but we were just like going over our day and talking and catching up. And so he was laying and I was straddling him. We were having a conversation, whatever. I put my hands on his chest in a way like this, and just was
Mhm.
like pushing on him, just, you know, as kind of affection, just being whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And I was sucked into the first portal of my life. And that shit was crazy. It was a school night. It was, you know, and AJ had to be up in the morning. And I all of a sudden was flying through stars. It was a galactic portal, like they have it on movies. I've, you know, and what's so funny is that I never watched a fantasy movie. I hated fantasy. I had no imagination. Anything with dragons, fairies, wizards was like, no.
I know.
Yeah. And now all of a sudden it's happening, and AJ always laughs at me because it seriously was just a rule. Like, if it has a dragon, fuck that, I'm not watching it, you know. And now I'm just like, I want to see all the dragon stuff because I've met 2 dragons now, you know. But this time I was flying through a portal, and it was literally like a cylinder of stars, and I was flying through it fast. And so I'm again weeping, sweating, snot, just
Mhm.
sloppy as fuck, just like, oh my gosh, you know. And I'm
Yeah.
telling AJ, I'm in a portal, I'm in a portal, you know.
Yeah.
And then at the end of this portal, everything went white, white, bright, bright. And I was surrounded, not surrounded, but I could see in front of me hosts and hosts and hosts, endless, endless beings that
Yes.
looked like the shape of an evergreen tree, just like this, like perfectly, I don't know, or like a candle, the flame of a candle or something.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they were all white, and there were countless, countless, countless of them. They're just more than you could ever imagine. And it was like I knew them and they knew me, and they were overjoyed to see me there, and I was overjoyed to see them.
Yeah.
And I was just communing with these what angelic beings. It was the first time I experienced what I think is nirvana. You know, I don't know. This is all very new to me still.
Yeah.
But it was crazy. It was so beautiful. And I was very aware still at the time that AJ needed to go to bed, that he had to be up at 5 or whatever in the morning, that it was a school night. And so I kept apologizing to AJ. I'm sorry. I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. But I had no concept of time, where my consciousness was in this other place. And I mean, it was the most profoundly beautiful experience that I could
Yeah.
ever describe. And then I tell them, you know, they didn't want me to leave, and I knew I had to go. They knew I was going to leave, but it was this deep, deep just love and affection and joy that was so difficult to walk away from.
Yeah.
But I came back all the way back into my body, and I was covered, drenched in sweat and tears. And I said, honey, I'm so sorry. It was so hard to leave. I didn't want to leave. I thought it had been 2, 3, 4 hours for sure. And he pointed at the clock. He said, honey, you've been gone for 9 minutes. And I was like, I just started weeping again. I was like, are you? That was my first experience where I was like, oh my God, time and space is earth specific. And that was my very first experience with that. A little while later, we went to Cabo with some friends. And in Cabo, the night before this happened, AJ and I had the most incredible experience with this UFO. There was also this orb that was hanging out with us over the water, this green orb. You see blue, and I see tons of green orbs. But it was such a magical night where AJ was opened up. One of our friends, an ancient being, came through our friend. His face completely changed. AJ and I both saw it. He gave us this beauty. He told me this were his words. He said, Tobi, there is no beginning and there is no end. And he literally looked like a square ancient Mayan statue. His face was like one of those ancient beings. Well, the next morning after that, everybody in the house was sleeping. It's this beautiful home that our friends have overlooking the ocean. And so AJ and I, our bedroom had a balcony overlooking the ocean that I loved to meditate on. So everyone else was sleeping, and it was about 7:30 in the morning, and I went out on that balcony and I was meditating. And I opened my eyes, and there were these beings that now I can see around me all the time if I'm relaxed, you know. But they were moving above my head, almost like they were being controlled by a joystick, like zin, 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 like that. It was very interesting. And they're very complex beings, but they're like made of they look like a bubble or something. It's like white on white, but they're so complex and they are very distinct. And then they have like little gray parts where I think are maybe their chakras or energy centers or something. But there were so many of them, and they were going behind. There was these slats above my head on the balcony, and they would go behind the slats, and then they would come back out, and it was the craziest thing. And I just thought, this is so interesting. And I just breathed and just observed, and I didn't feel any kind of energy from them other than just, wow, that I wonder what they are. Well, I went back into our room where AJ was sleeping, and I laid back down because I was getting kind of warm. And I started to meditate lying next to AJ. And I felt this overwhelming presence that was with me. And this presence asked me in my mind if they could take samples from my body. And in my mind, I responded that as long as it was, you know, never going to harm me or my children or anybody else, that, you know, they could absolutely take samples from my body. As soon as I gave the okay, just in my mind, I was flying through another portal that was completely different. And as I'm experiencing all of this, before I was in the portal, as this being is letting me know that it is there with me, AJ starts convulsing, just convulsing, completely out of control. And we had noticed before this that when I was having these experiences, if I'm touching him, the energy is so out of control that he jerks a lot. And so I have to disconnect. And so it woke him up. He was jolting so much, and I wasn't really paying much attention. It woke him up, and he said, what's going on? And the being told me, don't tell him what we're doing right now. Just tell him to go back to sleep. So I disconnected. My leg was touching his leg, and that's what was causing that. So I moved my leg, and he went back to sleep, and I just said, nothing, sorry. I'm just meditating, you know. Then he goes back to sleep and I find myself in this portal. Iggy, this portal was so crazy. And it was not until recently that I realized that I think I was on a ship. Through Dolores Cannon and QHHT, the first video I saw of that, I was like, oh my God, they're describing something that sounds very familiar to me. But at the time, all I know was that this portal was the whitest white of anything I've ever, this white doesn't exist in this realm. It's so crisp and clean and clinical, just like clean. It's not glowing white, it's like shiny white, like clinical white, you know? And so as I'm going through the portal is creating itself as I'm going. So when my feet get to the bottom of one slat, it adds another slat. So the portal's creating itself as I'm flying through it, which was totally different than the first one. Completely different, but very much a cylindrical portal. The last thing I remember is being in an extremely white place, and there's movement around me, and I can't remember anything about the place I was in other than I just remember thinking, like, I've never seen a place so white and clean. It was so clinically white and clean, like the cleanest hospital room you could ever imagine or something, but white, white, white. And then I saw then it was like I was inside of my body and I saw what was taking samples. It was these gray spheres that looked kind of like those like candy melts that when you're decorating a cake, those like Wilton, those candy melts, that's what they looked like. And they were landing inside of my body at an angle, like they were landing in sand or something, and then pulling out, and whatever they pulled out had a sample in it of whatever, I don't know. That's all I remember. When these things are happening, they erase a lot of the memory.
Of your memory.
Mm-hmm. But I kept seeing those beings that I had seen on that balcony. I'm very familiar with them, but I didn't realize any of this was connected. You know, it's like it was all happening in these weird things, and then now it's all coming together because now these beings have introduced themselves by name and really started working with me. But at the time I was just like, what the fuck does this all mean, you know? And so there are so many different experiences I could tell you about. Everything has been so wild and so crazy, but the biggest part of it is that through all of this, it broke me wide open into facing the ugliest parts of myself, the trauma. They told me I have work to do, you know? And I got to work, and it has been really, really difficult. I've really just had to remove myself from so much of what my life was before in order to break down all the pieces and figure out what is real. And then, you know, it's like you go into this cocoon of healing, and in the cocoon, the caterpillar is nothing. It's not a caterpillar in that cocoon. It literally becomes mush. And I feel like I know what that feels like. I hit rock bottom multiple times in the last couple of years where it just felt like it was too hard to keep going, to open up these old wounds. It has been extremely painful, but it's also been so exciting. And I feel like these guides have made it so bearable, so worth it. So, you know, like as I'm writhing in pain, facing all of my trauma, I have these guides around me saying, you know, it's okay, and you're going to be okay, and there's a purpose to this. And ayahuasca was a huge part of that. During ayahuasca, I saw the same beings that I saw when I had done psilocybin. And so throughout this journey, I started working with psilocybin. And so I would say, I have no count, but I would say it's probably been like 8 to 10 times now where I have gone in a very ceremonial way, all by myself, deep into meditation, using the Johns Hopkins therapeutic psilocybin playlist that you can find on YouTube. Blindfolding myself, taking 3.5 grams of mushrooms and blindfolding myself and putting on these noise canceling headphones and allowing myself to go completely into that healing space. And it is heavy. I mean, there has been trauma that has come up that I didn't even know was living inside of me. And that is such a beautiful thing, because once you can recognize that blockage and release it, it truly is no longer there. You are free to
Physical weight.
Yes,
Physical weight release.
actual physical weight. And it's funny that you say that, because throughout this process too, when the ceremony of the trees happened, I was probably 30 or 40 pounds heavier than I am. And what happened after the ceremony of the trees is that my body started rejecting certain foods. It was like I was being taught how to care for and connect with my body. And I've learned so much about connecting with and caring for your body as part of the healing process. This is the vessel. And so as a result of this awakening process, my body has regulated itself. I freed up so much energy, and it literally is physical weight dropping off of your body. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So the last experience I'll tell you about, which was very recently, was one of the most profound of my entire life. And AJ and I were staying at a hotel in Scottsdale, the Scottsdale Camelback Resort, and having a little staycation with our family. But for the first few days, it was just AJ and I, and we decided to do psilocybin. And so our intention was to just have this connecting with each other night, maybe listen to music and laugh and cry and just connect and hold each other. But it ended up being a pretty brutal session where the medicine was heavy in our systems, and we were both so much more nauseous than we had ever experienced on psilocybin. So it ended up just being, it was nighttime. We ended up taking it at 8:22. We noticed, because that's AJ's favorite number, 22. Of course, it's 10:22 right now.
Of course it is.
So we take it at 8:22 p.m. and for the next few hours, we're both just kind of working through it. I'm having visuals, and my guide is there, and I'm very aware of her, but it was so miserable and so uncomfortable that we were both just allowing the medicine to work through our bodies. We weren't having regrets or anything. We were very much aware that this is energy work, and we were grateful that it was cleansing our energies, but it was not pleasant in any way. So at about midnight or 12:30 or so, we decided to just go to sleep. And my guides, one of them, the main one that was there in Cabo, that has been with me so much now, has taught me so much, and she's obsessed with her name. She loves her name. Most of these guides don't have names. They don't care about names, but she lets me know that she is there by saying her name. And her name is Jesus Kate. And
I love her.
I love her.
Again.
And it has nothing to do with Jesus of Nazareth. She doesn't give a fuck what you think about her name. She loves her name.
That's her name.
But yes, but she was being, it sounds rude to say obnoxious, but these beings, they do not have human manners. They're so funny. And so she was inserting her name into all of my thoughts. And on mushrooms, you're having like thoughts about your thoughts about your thoughts, and that shit goes deep. And she was like, Jesus Kate, Jesus Kate, Jesus Kate, Jesus Kate, even inserting like her name between the syllables of my thoughts. It was like, what are you doing? And then the other one, who's Jesus Kate's like absolute partner, they are like twin flame souls, and they're always together. His name is Eepert, and he was flying around me making human burping noises. He's very goofy and silly, and he was literally just going and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm too nauseous for this. What are you doing? You know, it was so weird. But it was just, they were very much making their presence known. They were there. I was seeing a lot of visuals, but I was so miserable that we both just wanted to go to bed. Well, then I closed my eyes, and as I'm fading into sleep, an anaconda looking being appears right in my eyes. So my eyes are closed, and this being is so vivid, so 3D, has glowing green spots on it. And this is not a new being. This being is the being that introduced me to the dragons. And so I had seen this being. I recognize it's not a scary being, even though it looks like an anaconda. I was holding this snake. Oh my God, I love it. They're so powerful. But
They really
this
are.
snake, I was holding this the first time the anaconda being came to me. And so that one showed up again. And AJ was already falling asleep, and I was kind of torn, like, what do I do? Do I wake up? Do I interact? Didn't matter. I had no choice. He was there, and as soon as he made himself known, he entered into my body to where all I could see were the shapes and patterns of him. I was just taken away. It's so impossible to describe, Iggy, but when
I
they
bet.
put their energy into me, it overtakes my entire body. The energies are so much more powerful than the human body is designed to handle. And so
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh my God, just freaking out, but it's good. And what it does is kind of freaks AJ out to the point where he's like, are you okay? And so I always have to tell him, like, I'm
No.
okay. It's good. It's all good things, but it's so insane. It's so overwhelming. But
Yeah.
I lose all sense of my body completely. And so one after another, these beings start introducing themselves to me. And they each are, I mean, they are in the room. They have such distinct and beautiful looks about them. They're so unique. So the anaconda one was first. Then there was this other one that was like a coral reef. It was just like millions of tentacles, this like purple, magenta, beautiful color. She came and took over my body so that all I could see was blue and purple and magenta.
Mhm.
And the
Your aura
experience
color.
of being this creature was there aren't words to describe it, but it felt like what it must feel like to be like a coral reef floating in the ocean or something. It was so beautiful. But then there were others that were erasing my memory of anything that was happening. There was this one that was a spider creature, but when she came in, she was very adamant to let me know that she was not a scary spider, that she was aware of the human thought processes when it comes to spiders. So she wanted to make it known that was not what she was, but it was like a big body with just millions of tentacles coming down, black and gray, and lights, like literally, what is it called? The bioluminescent lights. Yes. They're all so distinctly different, and they were introducing themselves one at a time. So some of them would come into my body. Two of them let me remember the entire thing. The coral reef one and the holy chief one that I told you about before. Yeah. But they would speak through my vocal cords. So this was the very first time that I experienced channeling, where I don't even have a recollection of it, because my mind and consciousness were taken over by the being that was using my vocal cords, but they were talking to AJ. So AJ's experience of this night was very different from my experience. My voice would completely change. He would ask them things and they would answer through me, and they would speak in a way that was like choppy English. Like there was a time where he told me that they said something like, Tobi is fine right now. She is doing fine. Stuff like that, where it's like almost robotic, and they're just like working to get the words through my vocal cords. It was so crazy. But I would just be experiencing like this whirlwind of energy, and it felt like a portal but not a cylinder, just like, oh my God. And it was so magical. They're just buzzing me with this insane energy and these beautiful visuals and messages. Every single time there was a message and a concept that they wanted me to understand, all through just concepts and telepathy. It was so crazy. One time he asked, "What do you think of me?" He asked one of the beings, this one that looked like a seahorse, "What do you think of me?" And they whipped me out of my body and showed me AJ as they showed me him naked, crouched down on a hill with like a sunset behind him.
Yeah.
A beautiful thing. It was just like him in almost the fetal position, but on his knees. And then that body turned into this glowing black crystal that they see him as. And their message was, "You are her anchor. You are her anchor on this earth, her protector." It was, and so then they pulled me out of my body so far that I could just see this cord and this crystal, this speck of a crystal. And I knew that it was AJ, but it was so far away. But what they were showing me was he's my literal anchor to this realm. Every time I would come back to my body, it was literally the craziest experience, because I was 100% outside of my body, not even having an awareness. I couldn't use my own human brain when they were in there. And then they would put me back and I would have instant nausea, sweat, like, the nausea of the psilocybin was all of a sudden there. I could feel a heart in my chest and a brain in my head. And I'm like, oh my God, I have a human body, and then another one would show up. And it got to the point where it was getting to be overwhelming, because I learned after this happened that we can set boundaries with this kind of thing, that I have to learn to set boundaries with these beings and these guides. At the time, I really did not know how to do that. And at one point, AJ asked, like, "Is this consensual?" And this being basically laughed at him and said, "We are all one. So I don't understand your separation mentality." Basically, is like, consent is not a concept that we understand, but that's okay if they don't understand it. What I'm learning is it matters to me, and that I have to learn to have boundaries even with the other side, That's been really important for me to learn.
And I think also, touching on that just a little bit, if somebody that happens to watch our live has experienced something like that erratic energy that you can't control, but it's not bad energy.
Right.
If you have a facilitator with you, in your instance, it would be AJ.
Yes.
Can remind the beings, like, Tobi has a human body, and she needs let's regulate her body just a little bit. Let's calm down just a little bit so that her human body can relax. And I've seen this in person. Yes, I've seen this done in person, where they speak to the energies or these beings, and they're like, hey, hold on, like, let's calm the breathing down. Let's cool the body off, because we are still human. Right. These bodies are still human.
You get outside of the human body, and I don't know if these beings have had human bodies or not, but they do not understand. They don't have human egos. They don't have human manners. They don't have human considerations. They laugh at you a lot. They're so interesting. They have such funny personalities, even though they really don't have like an ego about them.
Right.
Anyway, they did this whole thing where they showed me these insane ancient like coding. It looked like hieroglyphics or something. On this big like brass looking plate, and they lowered it down onto my body, and when they did, they told me they were imprinting me, and it was just this wild and beautiful experience, the most incredible sacredness that you could ever describe. And this last being was this, what I call now the holy chief, because he had the presence and the energy of like an ancient Native American chief or something, a gentle masculinity, so beautiful. And he created this temple around us out of feathers, brown and white feathers. And it was like glowing white from the floor. It was just this absolutely magical space that he had created, that we were in. And he was reminding me of how anybody, what he was pulling through my vocal cords was, and it was a struggle. And I remember it. I remember this one. He really let me remember this entire experience. He was pulling through my vocal cords that anybody can do this. Anybody can experience this. Anybody can experience these energies. We want to connect with the humans. We want to connect, but you have to open yourself, and you can help people open themselves. You can help people. And so it was this beautiful message of, these things are so sacred, but they are not meant to be kept a secret. That there's a big difference. They are meant to be shared in reverence and respect, but they are not to be kept. They want other people to connect with them, because these energies are healing energies. And when they put these healing energies into me and I share it with the world, then they're getting their energy into the human species. And that is what they want to do with as many people as possible. And so it's exciting for me to get to help people learn to do that. But through it all, I would say that the awakening process, I feel like now in the work I'm doing, I'm helping other people figure out how to live their lives. I feel like I figured out how to actually live, to really be here in my life, experiencing it with joy, no matter what is going on around me. That doesn't mean I'm not having sad moments, but it means that I have an awareness around the sad moments to where it's not taking me down. I'm not attaching myself to it, and I'm not resisting it either. I'm flowing with it. And what it comes down to that I teach my clients is really three things, three basic things that are the key to awakening, the key to fixing your life, the key to happiness, whatever you want to say. It's just what it takes to heal. The first one is to remove all energetic blockages. The yogis, anciently, they call them samskaras. But basically, it's anything that catches your energy. Those things that have happened to you in the past, or that are stuck from even your lineage, your ancestry, are actual energy. It's actual atoms spinning in a stuck circle. It's energy that actually needs to be released. And there are so many different ways to do that. So removing the blockages is a huge part of it, and it is a painful part of it. And there are a lot of ways to do it. One of the most profoundly potent ways is plant medicine. The second thing is learning to quiet the mind.
I think that's the hardest.
It is. It is so hard, and it is a constant practice. But that learning to do that is so important in being able to live a joyful and happy life. Remove the blockages, quiet the mind, and the last thing that I teach people to do is radically love yourself. You have to really learn what that means. And there's so much work for all three of these pillars of, these three areas are the areas you have to tackle in order to get control of your life, to be fully awakened, to be here and aware and enjoying every aspect of your life, no matter what is going on around you. You have to become like the tree. Loving yourself radically, you look to the tree and you get everything you need as far as how to do that. Mirror work, body consciousness work, EFT, emotional freedom technique, hypnotherapy, Reiki, sound healing. So many things that get these three things in line in our lives. And throughout the next few episodes or in the future, we'll be able to go through how we have figured out how to kind of crack the code on all three of these things, so that we're living happier and healthier lives. Basically teaching all of you the same things that I get to teach in my individual sessions. So really, like the UFOs and the beings and all of that, the portals, and that's really cool. And that's really fun. And that gets people, interested. But what it comes down to is doing the work. It's learning how to remove the blockages that live in you until you actually release them, learning how to quiet your mind, and learning how to radically love yourself. That is truly what it comes down to.
So as we end our live today, I think what would you say is like, how did you, if you could put it into words, because our awakenings are so incredibly different. So for me, it wasn't like I realized that I was having an awakening just by listening to my intuition, just by realizing that I information that I had stored in my mind was awakening, right? Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This was coming into my life this way. That's coming into my life that way. And recognizing that information, I could wrap my head around, oh, I think I'm evolving. I think I'm awakening. For you, how would you explain to somebody to recognize that maybe this is not a deep, deep depression? And I'm going to say this really quick because we are not doctors and we are not medical professionals, and depression is a serious, serious mental dysfunction. And if you're feeling that way, you need to go speak to your doctors, 100%. But for somebody that's in this like journey where they're like, I just feel so lost, I feel like I can't move forward, how would you explain to them, like, to recognize that maybe this is the beginning of your awakening, if that is what it is, not completely separate from mental illness? I want to make that very, very clear. But for like somewhere like me and you who have had bouts with depression but have moved through it, and then like the aha moment for you, how would you explain it?
I think that anybody watching this podcast right now is on a path toward awakening. Like, this is your
Absolutely.
sign that your
Mm-hmm.
struggle is trying to wake you up. This is your sign, you know?
Yeah.
For me, even when I had those visions, the ceremony of the trees is what I call it, when the trees woke me up, and I still did not recognize that as an awakening. I didn't know what an awakening was. I was so blind to any of this, and I still feel like such a baby, like, what the fuck is happening to me? That's how I feel all the time still, but I'm learning to just flow with it and work with it. I would
Mm-hmm.
say reading a few key books really
Mm-hmm.
helped start opening my eyes. The book that changed my life so profoundly is called A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And
Yes.
another one by Louise Hay is You Can Heal Your Life. Those two books made such a profound difference for me. There are so many other books. Another one called Untethered Soul, The Untethered
Yep.
Soul by
That's a
Michael
good
A.
book.
Singer. The Four
I
Agreements
think
by Don Miguel Ruiz. If you are struggling and feeling lost and like you don't really belong in the world anymore, or you're not relating, or you're feeling lonely, or you're feeling stuck, try one of those books, and
I think
or reach
also
out
for
and
me,
let us
yeah,
help you, you know?
for me, the two books I think that have made the biggest difference for me in this journey, and I read the first book a year ago, I want to say, if not more, and I've read it multiple times, is Conversations with God, which
Oh.
sounds very religious. But when you actually get into the meat of the book, you kind of realize where God really lives. You
Wow.
know,
Yeah.
who God really is for you in your life. I was very put off by the title, Conversations with God, because I'm like, I don't want to talk to Jesus. Like, that's not my jam. I want to talk to me. I am me. But that book did change my perspective a little bit. And then recently it would be, and I can't give you the authors because my brain doesn't work that way. But the recent book is It Didn't Start With You. And that book, I think, when, especially for women, and I'm not going to speak for men because I'm not a man, but I think when we do start this awakening process and trauma starts coming up, we start holding that really close to ourselves and realizing that some things that we deal with in our lives are not our energy. It Didn't Start With You literally changed the way that I looked at my lineage as a mother, as a woman, as a daughter, as a sister. And my mom's reading it. I'm forcing my mom to read it. And if I could force my sisters to read it, I would force them to read it as well, because it takes the blame out of the way that you feel.
Yeah.
And it looks for the source. And I can say I read the first 2 to 4 chapters and physically felt 100% better.
Wow.
dropped a ton of weight almost overnight, because as women, we do hold weight in different places, and it's just a really good book. I can't tell you who wrote it off the top of my head, because like I said, I can remember the title, and you're lucky if you can get that from me. So those are my two suggestions moving forward for women who maybe are not having such a magical, mystical experience into awakening, that might just be like teetering on the what's going on, or I brought this memory up, or all of a sudden the relationship with the maternal person in their life has just gone to shit, and they don't know where to look, and why is this real? What do I do? I think those two books actually, for me, and somebody that might be kind of on the same path that I'm on, those two books made a big difference for me in my life. And just to reiterate, like, everybody's awakening is going to be different. Like, me and you are night and day and night, black and white, purple and green. Like, we are so incredibly different, but so incredibly similar at the same time. The lessons that we're learning are very similar. The way we're getting the lessons are very different. And I think that's important for people to remember.
It's so interesting that the lessons are pretty much always the same. Really, all we're all seeking is inner peace and happiness in our lives, you know, fulfillment. And so when it comes right down to it, we all want the same things, and there's a million ways to get there. And it's so fun to get to be now helping people get there, figuring that out for themselves.
Sharing the information that we are being delivered in two very different ways, but still same message. So I think maybe next time we chat a little bit more in depth about meditation, what meditation looks like for us.
Oh, that would be great.
I think that's a beautiful next step, now that we've shared our awakening journeys that we are both still very much on. We are not awoken people, we are awakening. And I think if we share our actual meditation experiences, the good, the bad, the real, and the ugly about it, I think it will help people understand that meditation can be so much more than just what we think it is, which social media tells us it is. And we will start with that, I think, next week, and maybe progress into the modalities that we incorporated into our daily lives to promote this awakening process. What do you think?
I think that would be fantastic. I think that meditation is truly the foundation, and it's so simple, and we make it so complicated. Like you're saying, like, there are so many ways to meditate, and meditation becomes just kind of a way of life, to where it's not something like you're feeling shame, I should meditate, that's not going to help you, you know, but really just learning to incorporate it as a way of life. Kind of, I feel the same way about Reiki, where it's like, I'm doing Reiki all day. Everything is Reiki. You know, everything is quieting the mind and finding stillness in every moment, you know.
Feeling the energy, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, that's what we'll chat next time. I think that's a good next step. So
yeah.
I love your face.
I love
your story. Your story always brings me chills, and I'm always just a tad bit envious of the way that you get your messages, but I love hearing them, and thank you so much, so much for sharing them with all of us.
I just want to say that, you know, you say you're envious, but this has been very overwhelming for me, and you have been such a huge part of getting me through that. Like, you know, I talk about all these stories, but this shit has been hard, really hard, and very lonely and extremely disorienting. And there are times where I have questioned my sanity and said, like, what the fuck is wrong with me that I'm having these experiences? Maybe I'm crazy, you know, and leaving the Mormon church and leaving my marriage all at the same time so many years ago, my whole family thought I had for sure gone off the deep end. And so I don't have a lot of people who are convincing me I'm the, you know, just the shit. And so you are such a huge part of giving me strength in this journey, because this stuff isn't foreign to you. It's foreign to my family. I talked to my dad about the beings. I told him about that experience, and he was so kind, and he wasn't rude, but he's just like, well, I don't get that. You know, he's just very
Right.
uncomfortable with it, even though he loves me, you know? And
Mhm.
so I'm so thankful for your sisterhood and your friendship and for helping me feel less crazy. And so thank you.
Well, I'll get my scuba gear, you get yours, and we'll jump off together.
Yes, let's do it.
All right. I love your face so much. I
I
cannot
love,
wait to chat next time.
love you. Take care.
Love
We'll see
you.
you next time.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.